Before we get to your scheduled video, please remember that likes and comments tell YouTube to promote our work to other people, and subscribing to the channel tells you when something new drops. You can also head to the link tree in the description to peruse my books, join us on Discord, or support us on Patreon. You can get episodes of Journey of Wrestling and Violent Profiles early, as well as a load of other treats. Even just $1 a month earns you a name drop for being cool. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the show. Greetings and salutations, my fellow second takes. It is I, Eric J. Chucky, joined as always by the boy.
Hey.
This is the Two Nerds podcast. Before we get into anything else, especially today, we need to talk about who's cool. That's going to be Kitty Holbrook, DG, Destrucity, KTL, Thomas Austin Jr., Passion Killer 711. There's one more I'm missing on the tip of your tongue. I like that one because it's always on the tip of my tongue. It's a very clever username. Then, of course, there's our Trash Elite, which is Rob, and the person for whom this episode exists, a guy from Ohio.
If you're a member of, well, a lower tier than the Trash Elite, but
you are welcome to be part of the Trash Elite. I would appreciate it personally.
Yeah, we always welcome more members of the Elite.
I also appreciate it when you guys just watch a video, leave a comment, leave a like if you like what we're talking about. It's nice.
It is genuinely, it always baffles me that anyone listens. But if you subscribe to a high enough tier on Patreon, you don't just get to listen. You get to demand.
Yes.
You get to tell us what to watch. A guy from Ohio did just that when he had us watch Ghost in the Shell. Specifically, the original movie.
Yes, not the remastered quote-unquote version. Not as much as I wanted to make jokes about it. The Scarlett Johansson version.
And not Standalone Complex, the series.
There was another little series or mini-series they did as well. It wasn't that. It was the original. Now, I have watched a lengthy review of Ghost in the Shell years ago, but I haven't sat down and watched it myself. Have you seen it at all before?
To my recollection, I probably saw bits of this movie as a kid, but I don't think I've ever sat down and watched all of it. I know I've seen bits of it online. Hey, I was 12. Leave me alone. But
you were surely only watching at the age of 12 the vignettes of the city to indicate the passage of time.
And mood, yes.
Yeah.
But I haven't sat down and watched this whole movie. I in fact, was the day I watched this years old when I discovered that I had dyslexia'd Motoko Kusanagi's name my entire life as Makoto. I had swapped K and T, and I've read this word hundreds of times. Minimum hundreds of times.
Well, they say that when people read stuff, they usually only read the first and last bits and fill in the rest.
And I must have, locked it in as the other more common Japanese name and then just never actually read it again. Wild.
I've seen several, maybe, 6, maybe more episodes of Standalone Complex. I enjoyed that, what I saw of it. So I was looking forward to this one. What I like about a guy from Ohio so far is he's having us enrich our cyberpunk vocabulary.
And getting me and White Raven for different movies, our nerd movie bona fides.
Yeah, if that's something that upsets you, feel free to subscribe at the tier at which you will have to make me watch a movie I haven't seen. You a big Ghostbusters fan? RoboCop? What else? Indiana Jones series?
So many. I'm not going to start.
There's so many. Anyway. We are vamping a bit because this movie is good.
This movie has a very specific problem. That problem is that it's actually really hard to make content about shit I just like.
It's also really hard to make any groundbreaking or novel content on an incredible layered film and story that came out 30 years ago.
Every think piece that's possible to be written on Ghost in the Shell has been written about at least 2 versions of Ghost in the Shell.
Unless you're comparing it to something that doesn't exist yet.
Or, I guess, comparing it to something that will never exist.
Yeah, in terms of a short version review, if you're just here to find out if we liked it or not, yes.
Yeah, it was fucking astounding. It was really good.
I had a more mild experience. It's a piece of art. right? A lot of what they do in this film, you know, as I've aged, I've become more of a popcorn film watcher. I want to be entertained, not as thought-provoked as I liked in my youth. And I would have loved this movie when I was young, but instead I was watching really crap anime.
As we all were.
Yeah, I remember
Except the guy from Ohio, who's apparently a hyper Chad.
Yeah. The second time I tried to watch Ping Pong Club with but a few years under my belt, I cringed out of my own skin and wondered about my teenage self. Yeah, this is something that I viewed. I was thoroughly gripped. I was entertained. I nodded along with a lot of the philosophical musings. And man, the composition of a lot of these scenes was so incredible. They communicated so much through, in particular, when Motoko surfaces from her dive and is just kind of staring at the city.
Genuinely, one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie.
Yeah, that was really, really powerful, really poignant. I also liked the relationship between her and Bato, and I always have, but the small level of friendly banter. It really humanizes both of them, which I think is critical to the plot and the underpinnings and the questions it asks.
It helps also to have Bateau there and all of the stuff around the Major, just because we watched the dub, because that's what's available on Amazon, and it's actually, like, I found a copy of the sub later, but I don't think it's supposed to be uploaded to where it is, so I'm not going to tell you where. I don't want to take it down. But it's actually, I guess, hard to get a hold of in terms of, like, streaming. So we watched the dub, and the Major's voice actress is not good.
It's, I believe, the same woman in the future, but...
maybe she gets good.
Yeah.
In 1995... she was not good.
And that's kind of how anime was back then. Even Richard Epcar, as incredible as he is these days, with such range and such talent and emotion, nobody makes old man soup lips noises like Richard Epcar, in my book. He's not at his best here. He's serviceable.
Everyone else was pretty okay.
Yeah.
But, and you know what? It was floated that her flat, affected, emotionless delivery might have been an intentional creative choice to reflect the Major's emotional state and how she feels constrained by her circumstance. No, but I like that idea.
I do think at the end, I mean, we're going to be getting into spoilers for a really old movie here, so, you know.
It's like 30 years old,
Yeah.
guys. It's okay.
I think at the end, after she's combined or whatever, she does speak differently. Obviously, the child actor is different, but when she switches to her regular voice, she sounds more fluid and more emotive. Now, maybe that's me, snorting a line of copium, but I observed that at the time and kind of thought maybe that was an intentional expansion of the character. And actually, if you don't mind, can we talk about perhaps the weirdest thing I came away from this movie feeling?
Absolutely.
This is a cyberpunk story with a happy ending.
Yeah, which made you feel as though the movie wasn't over yet, because it had a very classical, open-ended, what happens next sort of life goes on style cyberpunk ending. But with the small caveat of everything isn't fucked forever this time. It actually is somewhat mildly hopeful. And so it doesn't feel like the movie's over yet. Where is the second boot? I'm looking for the other shoe.
Yeah. And I really walked away from it feeling, I guess, wanting more. Which, fortunately, there's a lot more.
If you want more Ghost in the Shell, there is a lot more Ghost in the Shell to have.
Good and questionable.
Yes. And in name only. Like
Sure.
the Scarlett Johansson movie. I looked up the plot of the Scarlett Johansson movie. That's a different plot. I'm not even saying it's a bad plot. It's just not the same.
It's ironically closer to what I was expecting from this film. Because it has been at least 10 years since I watched the review. I thought this movie was both going to be more horrific and more directly questioning, which is something I like about it. I like that it's a subtle film. I like that it also gives you time to breathe and think.
The movie really doesn't bother to beat you over the head with much. It's fairly subtle in its mood and its tone setting. It beats you over the head with exposition, but given its runtime, I don't really know that they had a better way to do that.
More extended booby scenes, I think, may have pleased anime fans.
I mean, yes, the anime fan always wants more booby scenes. Now, to be fair, I would like to call out that Ghost in the Shell is an inspiration for many movies, for many things across all of nerd culture. It inspired, clearly Metal Gear Solid. Mm-hmm. It inspired parts of The Matrix. Mm-hmm. It inspired so many different nerd properties. Parts of the new Cyberpunk game.
And just how the genre evolved in general. This is the mid to late 90s, depending on your definition. Cyberpunk occurred earlier, way earlier, in the 80s at the very latest.
Ghost in the Shell is really one of the tent poles of the genre.
It shapes the visual. It really carries the torch of a lot of the principal questions asked within a cyberpunk property.
Yeah, and it goes all the way back to the origins of the word cyberpunk, where it's... I'm not going to explain it. It's very long and convoluted, but essentially questions about identity and what is free will and what is a person are very intrinsic to the etymology of the genre. But having said all of that, what I didn't know that it inspired, that it caused later creators to ape, was having a pair of boobies on screen while you're doing your endless exposition. I didn't know Game of Thrones got that from this movie.
I do want to say as well about the exposition. I don't want to say that it's not important, but I would guess those scenes are intentionally very dry, even the ones without, titillation in the foreground, because the bullshit the government is doing...
It's intentionally arcane.
It's not anywhere near as important as the characters and what's going on between them and within them.
I would say it's about a step above Star Trek's technobabble.
Yeah, it's more grounded. It's a political battle.
It isn't important. It ultimately isn't important to the emotional core of the story. Why, the puppet master is, the person they are, why they're in the situation that they're in, that's not nearly as important as who they are.
And it isn't that important until it is. It's something that's just sort of set dressing until it's brought to the front. One of the contrasts I could point out is when the hacker dude is explaining everything to the old man in charge, and we do have names up here, but there's no pictures next to him, and my brain is bad. That scene is framed a little differently. There are more dynamic cuts. The dialogue is less dry.
You're supposed to pay attention to this.
Absolutely. And then a couple of times they reiterate what are the most important themes of the Puppet Master. Possible motivations, the lack of a gender necessarily. They really drop that like 3 or 4 times.
They slam that on, like, if this were made with more modern sensibilities, the Puppet Master would have a pretty heavily, strictly enforced they-them pronoun, I think.
I love the scene in the car when the dudes from Section 9, I think, the Outsider guys, are leaving. And the doctor
6.
guy...
Section 6.
They're 6? Okay, my bad. The doctor guy speculates that who knows why the Puppet Master is trying to get in there so bad. Maybe he has a girlfriend he likes. And, they wait on that. And it's such an obvious trope in any other kind of movie, but the tone this has set, it's such a fantastic way to make you wonder, especially in watching it, or rewatching it, I mean to say. It's such good foreshadowing that doesn't seem like foreshadowing.
Maybe I just know more spoilers of this movie than I thought I did, in the back of my head. It definitely did come across as foreshadowing to me.
Well, yeah, but it's not as it's not as obvious as you would have in a lot of other films.
No,
That is kind of
again,
my
this
point.
movie is not terribly invested in you getting it.
No, well, it's something that you can. I'm sure that they would encourage you to rewatch. I mean, you go to the theater, you check it out. They had such a big event release. I believe it was in Japan and China and the UK. It was released simultaneously.
It what tripled its budget, right?
Yeah, they made a fantastic amount of money for what it was. I'm not going to search through Wikipedia. You can correct me in the comments about what the third country was. But it was intended to be such an art project, really, to bring anime to the world. And
It's a hell of an attempt. Like, if you're gonna try and do that, that's a good first shot.
I think it succeeded really well. I mean, it's all told in the fact that this is something we're still talking about today. Most people, if they don't know a lot of anime, if they're under that first cut of the Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, Naruto, maybe One Piece, probably One Piece at this point, Ghost in the Shell is probably on that second layer. It's your British bulldog of professional wrestling, if you will. So, yeah, I think it's got the staying power. And I think all of the things it explores are still relevant today. Honestly, that was another thing I wanted to say about the art. But for the color palette used, this art does not feel dated.
It definitely has a very 90s color palette, you're right.
Yes.
It does feel like 90s anime.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
I wouldn't call that dated. I would... Now, this might be me being a snooty bitch. I would call it almost better because it's way less stylized than most modern anime.
And one has to wonder, I was doing a little bit of reading, the creators or creator, again, I don't have this information on notes, really wanted fluid, realistic motion. So when you make things stylized, especially in anime, but any animation, you make those characters, video games is another great example, look less realistic so that you can fudge some of those animations without them looking weird.
Whereas this movie has an incredibly strong grasp, haha booby joke, on anatomical drawing.
I would agree, yeah.
It feels very grounded in that way. In a way that, older anime, 80s and 90s anime almost all is, to a certain extent. And later anime, more modern stuff, just almost none of it is.
Unless it's about food.
Yeah, unless it's about food, and then it's very grounded. Almost undergrounded.
I also think narratively, in addition to visually, it's so moody, it's so atmospheric, and it evokes a feeling in a way that a lot of movies I enjoy don't. It really makes you feel like, sunrise or sunset on a rooftop somewhere. That sort of in-between feeling of everything is okay and everything is fucked.
I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. The permanent sort of transigence of a cyberpunk city is hard to get across. How it is a machine that will keep going, and things will change, and things will look different, and the signs will change, and all that. But the machine will ultimately keep going, regardless of what happens in this story. Is hard to get across well, and I feel like this movie does it incredibly well.
In a way that the more upbeat ending does not defeat, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
Because a lot of cyberpunk stories will have that tragedy happen. Even Blade Runner, spoilers for Blade Runner, the current version anyway, the more modern one, they get away in the end, but it doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like an ellipsis at the end of their story.
It feels like they left the setting, as it were.
And will things work out for them? You don't really know. It doesn't look great. They've got the odds against them. Whereas here, everybody who mattered survived. The interesting people came to an agreement and, you know, the horrible things that occurred were stopped, the machine is still churning, but so are we. And it doesn't detract from that machine still churning.
Yeah, normally most cyberpunk will get that feeling of the grinding gears of capitalism, as it were. It will get that feeling from tragedy. It will get that feeling from grinding the protagonist down beneath the treads.
Right. Oh, and then moving right along. You know, you have a scene, and this is purely hypothetical, where your main character dies or their love interest dies, and then it like fades into city life moving on, and eventually the crime scene stuff being taken down, and then a new shop goes in where those people were killed. You know, that's the kind of ending I typically expect from a cyberpunk narrative.
Whereas this has it's tonally very different. Ultimately, you know, this is kind of a small story.
It feels like an episode.
This is a very pivotal part of a couple people's life, but it's not going to change the world. But that's okay, because it did change their life.
Yeah.
And things move on. Things change. Change is necessary. Change is a part of living. People die. That too is a part of living. And life goes on. But, like, parenthetical hopeful. And that's so rare in this genre that it was a nice breath of fresh air.
And one has to wonder if it's not because it is an Eastern property, because there's a lot of undertones of the principles of Buddhism within this. And, you know, really a lot of what the Puppet Master talks about in those final scenes is what does it matter, the temporary nature of our current existence? Things are meant to die and change, as you said. And this is something intrinsic to cyberpunk. Because of this, maybe not, because of other properties, interpreted this way because of, you know, this being an anime. And we pick up and move along. It's sort of like a different version of a man planting a tree he will never sit in the shade of.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful, and it's so inspirational in a way. And it also kind of speaks of, you know, one could interpret it as moving past tragedy. Even if you survive, even if the worst happens. Guardians of the Galaxy 1. Spoilers for Guardians of the Galaxy 1. Rocket Raccoon is left without his best friend in Groot, but he has his son. And it's not the same guy, but it is something to remember his best friend by, and time marches on. So you accept, you grow, you change, and we experience this new and beautiful life. Or ugly. I believe there were once some facts written about life. That you take the good, and you take the bad, and you take them both. And then you have some sort of cone, I believe. The sound of one hand clapping.
But I mean, I want to make a joke, but, like, until you decided to make a meme out of that, you were basically just spitting facts.
Facts and memes, it's what I've got.
I also love for being a very seminal work that is very beloved amongst the nerds, amongst my people, this is a very, relatively speaking, dry and kind of boring movie.
It helps that they do a lot of nudity and gunfire and a couple guys explode.
When the action is going, it is going 1,000. Like, the action scenes are very cool, but there are also very long musical interludes and very long scenes of meditating upon the nature of identity. Please note, these are not derogatory things I'm saying. I really like those.
Well, and that's why I call it more of a work of art than what I would traditionally put on as a movie. It reminds me more of the indie films about character studies, about broken families I would watch in my teenage years. Or, you know, really moody pieces that were just about setting a tone and guiding you through it, that used background and music and stuff like that to convey thoughts. I mean, even the very simple central theme of what does it mean to be human? When are you more machine than man? And does that count?
Does it matter? What counts as a person?
It's not as drilled in as you would expect. It's a very simple, a very subtle subtext that you see in Motoko's eyes, that you see in her posture, that you hear in the silences between somewhat innocuous things that other characters say before something else happens. They really could have gone hard with this, and I think a lot of other people would have, and there wouldn't be anything wrong with that,
But if they had, I don't think there'd be 19 versions of this.
No. I think it's the mystery, right? I mean, it's the Dark Souls of it all, right?
Yeah, I don't know, of all the versions of Ghost in the Shell, and forgive me, I don't know them all. Has there ever actually been a sequel? Because Standalone Complex is a prequel, I believe, or takes place before the events of the movie. It almost has to.
That I will click through for if you could vamp for a minute.
Sure, because what happens next is very interesting to me, but I don't know that it's the kind of thing that would get explored, because it almost feels like that the people who love this would probably prefer it not be, because it's better as an open question. It's better as an empty lyric for you to fill in.
Ghost in the Shell 2 Innocence is a 2004 film billed as a separate work and non-canonical sequel.
Aha, okay.
I'm not finding an easy link, and my keyboard is so loud. But I'll check out Standalone Complex here.
So,
yeah, let's see.
Yeah, no, just given what I'm reading here, it has to be a prequel.
2030 is when it takes place.
Well, I'm just talking about, the events of the movie.
Sure. Yep, 2029. No, so it is a sequel.
Yeah.
But
how?
It's been a long time since I've watched it. If you guys know in brief, if you want to let us know in the comments how this moves on.
Well, I mean, that's very interesting to me that's a sequel, because, how?
I mean, that's kind of the thing that gets you to watch a thing,
No,
right?
yeah, no, I'm actually way more likely to watch Standalone Complex now.
I don't remember the details. Again, this was it was when the original Full Metal Alchemist was on that I was watching this, so it's been a minute. I remember enjoying it. I remember enjoying the questions it posed and the interesting concepts offered, and it was still visually beautiful in a different way. You can really appreciate the time and effort that was put into the animation here. In some of the small ways as well. I remember when we reviewed Lego Batman, which nothing saying about the plot. I loved that you could see fingerprint smudges on some of the Legos. I love that there was wear on some of them. It's that kind of minuscule detail that really makes a world feel three-dimensional and makes it easier for whatever narrative you're trying to run through it, whatever story you're trying to have these characters tell, more fluid.
Verisimilitude almost always increases ease of narrative absorption. I did want to touch briefly on something you mentioned wanting to talk about, which was the most horrifying fucking thing that happens in the movie.
Absolutely. What was the guy's name? Corgi?
The trash collector guy.
Yeah, the friendly trash collector man.
Garbage collector A, maybe?
Who could know? So he's being used as a drone, a pawn for the puppet master to get some shit done. He's fed some lines of bullshit about why he's doing the things he's doing.
And they do it by what they term in the movie as hacking his ghost, which is editing his self-conception, editing his memories, which the movie pretty strongly posits are the only real part of you that is you.
Which is an interesting question in the first place. I mean, the you is always changing, right? I don't remember the same things I remembered 20 years ago.
And thus, are you the same guy?
I don't think I am, but I am in the same meat suit, and there's enough carryover that, look, I'm the ship of Theseus. We all are, right?
And I think that's the point the movie's trying to make, at least one of the points it's making, is that if you are nothing but your memories, and you stop remembering something, if you forget, you're not really the exact same person as you were before. You're a slightly different person. And that person goes forward in time as like the previous one's kid as much as anything else.
Sure. An evolution, perhaps, even. 2.0, 2.1. But what happens to the garbage collector is that he's basically been given false, believable memories about circumstances. And then when he gets arrested, he's taken in and the cops have to explain to him, I'm sorry, none of this exists. We're going to do what we can to help you. But
yeah, you remember having, a family and they weren't real. They were never real. They never existed. And more's the point, we can't get you your actual memories back. We can't fully scrub the fake ones either. You're always going to kind of remember having a family that no longer exists. That's fucking horrifying and heartbreaking.
it is, and it's such a small moment. And I think it's really an echo of the larger themes of cyberpunk as a genre and the movie in general, because Motoko sees this horror, witnesses that what this man goes through, and just kind of has to exhale and move on with her job.
Fully aware that it's entirely possible that she doesn't have any real memories either. She has no way of proving that she does. She might entirely be, all her memories might be fake too, and there's no way to tell. The dread of that is at the core of the movie in some respects, and is very affecting filmmaking.
In the reality of it, what happens to the garbage collector, yes, dread, absolutely. I would hate for that to happen. But dealing with it, one must ask oneself, does it matter? You can't interact with any reality you can't perceive. So if these memories are made up, if they're happy, is it okay to cling to them? I think so. If you can't remember a life that you can't go back to, does it matter to who you are today? Probably not.
If all you are is your memories, it doesn't really matter if they're fake.